Today I'm making art inspired by Venice Beach, which is on the Pacific Ocean in Los Angeles, California, and I'll be using oil paint. Venice Beach is just south of Santa Monica and is known for its boardwalk, including Muscle Beach and the skate park. I start with a blank canvas and take a pencil to make some structural marks, and this has a horizon, so I measure that out with a ruler so that it's perfectly straight. And then I take a pencil and kind of sketch out the whole painting on this canvas based off of the structural marks that I did before. Muscle Beach is an open-air gym where bodybuilders and wannabe bodybuilders go to lift weights. Arnold Schwarzenegger used to work out here back in the day. I lay out all the paint colors I'll be using onto some palette paper. Then I dip my brush in turpenoid and linseed oil, then some white, and then some cadmium yellow pale to start out the first color, which is for the lightest shade of clouds. Then I use a medium-sized round brush to start filling in the whitest clouds. And I'm going to be refining the edges on this with a smaller brush later, so I don't have to be too precise here. It's kind of just about filling the canvas with paint. Now I'm going to mix the sky color, starting with this blue I no longer know the name of, and adding some French ultramarine, and then mixing that up with some more white. And then I mix that blue with the white from the clouds to make a slightly lighter shade of blue. Then I take a medium brush in the lighter of the blues, and I start filling in the sky and the lightest parts. And I like this part of the painting process because it kind of feels like I'm coloring in a coloring book that I created for myself. Then I switch to the slightly darker shade and fill in the rest of the sky, with the exception of the small, hard-to-reach places that I'll do later with a small brush. Muscle Beach isn't the only place to exercise on the boardwalk. There's also tennis, handball, and basketball courts. Now I'm going to mix the color for the second whitest cloud, starting with white and adding cadmium yellow pale, then the mystery blue, and then ivory black to make it a little gray, and then finally some alizarin crimson to mix with the blue for a purple tone. Then I fill in the second lightest clouds, and I did the sky in between these two shades of clouds because I'm layering on top of the whitest clouds in some parts, and I wanted to give that paint a little bit of time to dry. Then I make the next cloud shade starting with ultramarine and adding burnt sienna and some mystery blue. And there's 5 different shades of clouds here because I visited Venice Beach around sunset when there were lots of extremes to the sky. So I'm filling in the third cloud shade, getting closer to the horizon as the colors get darker. Then I mix the second darkest shade of cloud using ultramarine and some black. Then I add more black to one section to make the darkest cloud color. Then I go in with the second darkest color, and I always try to start with the lightest colors and move toward the darker ones as I go because light colors are more forgiving, which is helpful when you're starting a painting and figuring out where everything is going. And then I take the darkest shade of clouds and fill in the rest of the gaps down to the horizon. And now I'm done with that first pass of the sky. The Venice skate park was built by the city in 2009. It's 16,000 square feet, has a pool, and is a great place to watch people skate. Now I'm going to do the water, starting with white for the lightest shade, and then adding mystery blue, and then viridian green to give it some aquamarine tones, and then some cadmium yellow pale to brighten it up a bit. Then I start in with a medium brush, filling in the lightest parts of the water, which is where the light is reflecting off the bubbles of the surf. Then I take that color and add mystery blue and ultramarine for a slightly darker color for the darker parts of the surf that are in the background. The beach at Venice is huge and clean and a great place to walk barefoot in the sand. Now I add some oxide of chromium and ultramarine to make a darker shade of water, and then I add some black and more ultramarine to make an even darker shade. Then I take the darkest shade to fill in the spots of the surf that don't have bubbles, and I leave a lot of it blank because I'll need the smaller brush for it. And then I take the slightly lighter color and fill in the ocean near the horizon, and this is lighter because it's closer to the setting sun. Now I mix the color for the sand, starting with white and adding burnt sienna and alizarin crimson, and then ultramarine, and then some more burnt sienna and some cadmium yellow pale. And I keep adding these same colors and mixing until I get the right tone. Then I take that medium brush and fill in the sand at the bottom, which is the last and easiest color to do because it only requires a medium brush. There's not really any detail that requires a small brush here. Venice was founded in 1905 as a beach resort town and became a part of LA in 1926. Now I'm going in with a small brush to do all the parts that are too detailed for the medium brush, starting again with the lightest shade of clouds. And I'm filling in all the gaps that I left during the first round. Then I do the same thing with the small brush in the blue sky, filling in all those lines I drew with pencil before. I lived in Venice for a little bit and would go to the beach all the time and took a lot of video of the ocean. Then I go in and do the second lightest shade of clouds with a small brush, getting those detailed parts. And then I do the next darkest shade of clouds. And I want this painting to be a little bit abstract, so I've stopped looking at a reference photo and I'm making these shapes more about how I want them to feel rather than how they look in reality. Then I do the second darkest shade of clouds with a small brush. And as you can see, I've taken the opportunity to adjust the color a little bit, which is the nice thing about oil paints. They're opaque, so you can layer and change colors without having to worry about the color below it seeping through. Then I do another color update on the darkest clouds, and I did this because I thought there was a bit too severe of a contrast between the light and dark clouds, so I decided to lighten up the dark ones a bit. And so because I'm changing the color, I use both the medium brush here to cover more ground and the small brush to get more detailed parts. Then I hop back up to the sky to fill it out a bit more with the medium brush because the paint was too thin and the canvas was showing through a bit there. The first time I went to Venice was about 5 years ago, and I took this picture that I turned into this painting that I did when I was cold in New York and thinking about LA. So for this painting, I wanted to do something similar but slightly different, so I visited it on a cloudy day at sunset instead of a clear sunny day. So here I'm using a small brush to fill in the light green parts of the surf that I couldn't get to with the big brush before, filling in those lines that I drew. And then I do the same thing with the slightly darker surf in the distance. On this trip to Venice, I got to see one of the Venice Beach lifeguards in action who handed off his sunglasses before going to rescue a kid who got too far out in the surf. He retrieved the kid and returned him to his parents and then got his sunglasses back. Then I take a medium brush and go over the ocean near the horizon again because the paint from the previous round was pretty thin. And then I finish up the details with a smaller brush. Then I use a small brush with the darkest ocean color to refine the lines from before and fill in the spots that I couldn't do with a larger brush. And the paint's kind of thin in some spots here, but that's okay because I'll be going over it again later with another layer. Then I do another layer of the light green, adjusting the color slightly because it was a little too light and was competing with the clouds. I squeeze into all those little spots. Then I do another layer of dark green because I messed it up a bit when I was switching the last color. And then I do another layer of sand. I'm happy with the color, I just want to thicken the paint up a bit so that the canvas doesn't show through. Before Venice became a part of LA, it had 3 piers with games, roller coasters, and performers, but now there's just one simple fishing pier. So I thought I was done with the painting here, but then I looked at it under natural light and saw some pencil poking through, so I decided to do another layer, starting with this lightest shade of clouds. And then I do the sky, making sure I lay the paint on thick enough to make it nice and rich and cover up any pencil marks. The fishing pier is further south on the beach, away from the main boardwalk, and is a great place for views of the beach and the ocean. Lots of people surf next to the pier as it's the southern end of the Venice breakwater, and there's also always people fishing off the pier. Now I do another layer of the middle shade of the clouds, starting with the big brush and then moving to the small brush. Just trying to get some paint in here so that none of that pencil shows through. Then I do another layer on the second lightest shade of clouds, and that's slightly out of order from how I was doing it before, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. I went back to the beach to watch the sunset and found the view that I made the painting of right there. I like the meeting of the light and the dark and the clouds. Then I do a final layer of the dark green ocean sections, going over some parts that weren't very well defined before and giving them some definition. As I left the beach to go back to the car, I passed the Venice canals, which I'll be doing a separate video about in the future. And then I signed the painting, and I actually tried doing this before when I thought I was done with it the first time, but the sand paint was too wet and it was really hard, so this time it was easier because the paint had time to dry out a bit. And here's a time lapse of the whole painting from start to finish. And there's the final finished painting. Thanks so much for watching.